Welcome to another episode of IBSC Exploring Boys Education, a regular podcast in which we investigate issues that impact and affect boys' schools and the education of boys. I am Bruce Collins, IBSC Director of Membership Engagement, and it's a real privilege to be your host. I'm excited to introduce our second Talking Heads feature. In episode 6, if you remember, we were able to connect with Anthony McAuliffe and Shane Kidwell, heads of Brisbane Grammar School in Australia and St Albans College in South Africa, respectively. In this episode, we talk with John Botti, head of the Browning School in New York City.
I had a colleague who would say that if you hug a boys' school, it'll really hug you back in a way that's hard to forget. And I've really come to believe that.
And Tom Batty, principal of Scotch College in Melbourne, Australia, and chair of the IBSC board.
I don't believe that we can talk about what makes a good boy or a good man before we consider what we mean by a good person.
Before we get into this fascinating conversation, however, I'd like to highlight some IBSC online classes which start soon. On June 8th, we have 2 classes starting: The Self-Motivated Boy, which develops future-ready leadership in the classroom, and a course in single gender education, which is specifically for teachers new to boys' schools. On July 13th, we repeat the single gender education course, but are also offering Building Leadership in Schools for Boys and another popular course, Mastery Practice in Teaching Boys. You can register for any of these classes now and also keep your eyes peeled for new online classes being launched later in 2020. Furthermore, our on-demand Boys and Reading short course is proving very popular, with close to 60 registering for the class since its launch in February. This class can be joined at any time. See our website for details. Lastly, if you haven't yet listened to our 2-part series on reaching, teaching and succeeding with boys of colour, I'd urge you to set some time aside to do so. You can also listen to our special episode on how boys' schools around the world are adapting to online schooling during the COVID-19 pandemic. Speaking of COVID-19, Tom Batty had some encouraging words for the coalition before we got into the nitty-gritty of our interview.
We're in challenging times, and there will be some things in common that we're all facing. Each school will have its own particular matters, but there's a fair bit of this that we're all facing together. We are stronger together, without a shadow of doubt. Our ability to learn from and support each other is so important, and the IBSC plays an important part in that. We will be disrupted. It will be a difficult time for schools. It will be a difficult time for the coalition, but we're strong. Our office is remarkably well led and well resourced, and we will respond and we will adapt. And there will be an impact, but we will emerge stronger, and our community will be tighter. How do you get through things? You learn, and education does that. And we will educate each other and ourselves, and the coalition will respond and support people, and will become a stronger organisation for it. The IBSC obviously sends its love to all member schools and their staff and their families.
Following on from Tom's message, I asked both heads, John and Tom, to share their insights about the value of IBSC membership to them personally and to their schools.
I don't know of another organization which is providing a stronger or better conversation about how we can all answer our collective calling to serve boys well, so that they can help create a better world for us all. For me, it's the best place to go to share best practices, to have understanding of best school cultures, to explore best institutional programs. I love getting together with IBSC colleagues, or just speaking with IBSC colleagues, because I never walk away without having had a reminder of the kind of universality of some of our concerns and our questions and our hopes.
I sort of feel that if you think something's important, and you value it, it's incumbent upon you to get better at it. And how do you get better at stuff? You generally, obviously you want to learn more about it, but you also want to learn how different, in our case, schools, but also different communities, how they adapt to and how they seek to progress, those things that are common to us all. And one of the many great things about the IBSC is the opportunity to see exactly that, how different communities, different cultures seek to go about progressing education, progressing the development of boys into young men. The same things we're all dealing with, but doing it in different ways or with different flavors. And through that, you learn to look at your own school and your own classes differently. And it gives you an opportunity to grow.
For me personally, I think for my colleagues, just the relationships in the coalition have just they've been so fulfilling and so sustaining. I've been fortunate enough to connect with some of the most imaginative, generous, wise, thoroughly good-humored educators in the world. I think through the IBSC, and it's just it's a gift.
I love the collegiality. Teachers, in general, teachers are good people, and the IBSC brings together a lot of really good, talented people who care about education and care about their boys and their development, and that collegiality linked with the research, which has been a massive growth in the IBSC, led by some dedicated people, and really has over the last 10 years or so started to define our coalition. And give people opportunity to be involved and for us to learn from it. I like the thought, obviously, of improving the outcomes of boys. I enjoy the stimulating conversation that comes, and you can, for us and our staff and the boys as well. But most importantly, for me, I'd go back to being able to share time and ideas and experience with clever, insightful people from different parts of the world who are all invested in their own way in the same thing.
Boys' schools are unique and special places. Interestingly, both Tom and John were educated at co-ed institutions. I asked them how they were drawn into boys' education and what it is about boys' schools and teaching boys that they love so much.
I guess I would want to begin by saying that all my experiences as a student were co-educational, and I just kind of fell into boys' schooling out of college. I had an opportunity to work at a boys' boarding school, and so I took it. But I have to say that I came in with, I don't know if I want to say it was a jaundiced view, but I hadn't really given a lot of thought to why boys' schooling existed, and I probably came in with some assumptions that these were kind of seed beds of things like misogyny and sexism. But in short order, like within a matter of days, I came to realize that it's really less the composition of the student body and more the mission of the institution that counted. And I also, I guess, I noted that I had grown up in co-ed circumstances, and in those circumstances, I'd seen lots of sexism and misogyny and the things I'd worried about. But I realized in my co-ed world, I was seldom, if ever, invited into a conversation about what an authentic and ethical manhood could or would look like. And so, I found quickly that boys' schools were, I think, trying to do something significant, and that they really. What I really love about them is that I think they can mean so much to the boys who attend them.
I was educated co-ed all my life, and I was in my first ever teaching job in New Zealand. I left Britain, went to New Zealand, and I wanted to move down to Wellington, and a good job came up at a school, in a boys' school in Wellington, and it's that took me into boys' education. And from that, I just really enjoyed it, and the progression through to be a headmaster of a boys' school I suspect I probably would have wanted to do it in a co-ed school as well, but I happened to go down that path to that first school, St Patrick's College in Wellington, and absolutely loved it.
One of my favorite things about working and living in boys' schools is when boys who have graduated and going on to college, when they have their holiday breaks, just kind of how eager I find them to come back to school and to show that they've made good, as it were, when they've gone away. They love to say, "Well, I was so prepared for this," or "This conversation was easy for me because the experiences I had here," or "The relationships I've developed in college are great, but the foundation of how I learned to do that thing happened in my school, K through 12." And I think that's really exciting.
I had a reunion with some old boys in my boarding house a few months ago, and the stories, so many of them were of old times in the boarding house, and the conversations, which is captured beautifully, I think, in that lovely Harrow song of 40 Years On.
I think the boys really internalize the idea that they're asked to be part of missions that are often rare and significant. In my time with boys' schools, and I've been doing it for over 2 decades now, that just found it, like, if you embrace boys' schooling, I had a colleague who would say that if you hug a boys' school, it'll really hug you back in a way that's hard to forget, and I've really come to believe that.
I love the energy and humour of boys, and the fact that they can have a sense of mischief, but also those really sharp minds that can both flit in a moment from one thing to another, but also suddenly delve really deeply into the depths of reason, and contrary to what many people may feel who don't work in boys' schools, depths of emotion as well, the poetry they can write, and then flit out of that onto something seemingly quite light. I love the loyalty that boys can display to a cause bigger than themselves, and I really do welcome and love the reciprocity that exists in what is the unspoken contract that we have with boys. I love their pragmatism, the fact that you've got to convince them a little bit, and somewhere in there, it has been said about me from more than just my darling wife, but that obliviousness sometimes of not quite knowing what's going on, and I like the honesty and humour that breeds, that slight obliviousness to things.
I don't know that anyone would let me lead anything other than a boys' school at this point, but this is where I want to be. This is work that I really enjoy. I think that we as a collective of boys' schools have an opportunity to broaden a conversation that today's boys, and candidly today's men, I think need. And so being a part of a boys' school is really important to me professionally, and having the chance to be in a leadership position to help coordinate all these wonderful voices, to help hear voices which need to be amplified is really fulfilling. And so just if we view education in general as a large conversation between interested parties, this is exactly the type of education I want to be associated with.
Character education has become a bit of a buzzword in boys' schools recently, with many schools wrestling through what this means in terms of curriculum development, pastoral support, and interaction with boys. I was interested to hear how John and Tom and their teams framed this conversation at their schools.
One thing I would want to say is that if we're not in the game, if we're not in schooling to help boys become better men than they otherwise might be, then we're doing a disservice not just to the boys, but to all the adults in the community who are sacrificing and bringing their talents to bear.
I think that character is a byproduct of values, and I also am sensitive to character can be perceived that there are certain types of character which can be dominant I'm sure that's not what's meant by it, but that's why I sort of just steer away from it a little bit. So we tend to, before thinking about attributes, that you have to know what you believe in. And so we tend to focus, and I focus on values, and I believe that they stem from reflection of how we connect all that goes on in our own minds with all that we observe and those that we observe it with. And it's somewhere in there that we start to form our beliefs and our values about how we engage with the world.
At Browning, our mission is to foster the growth of courageous and compassionate men of intellect and integrity who aspire to contribute meaningfully to our world. And the language of contribution, the idea that you need to take the meaning you create and bring it into the world to help make that world a better place, is something that we really need to focus on. If character isn't being developed in the service of something larger, then we're not really doing our job.
At our school, we talk an awful lot, as I'm sure many schools do. We talk a lot about fundamental value as the inherent value and dignity of each person. And we have a question that we like to ask that leads to values, we believe, which is, how the heck did the world get to be like this? And how might it evolve to be better for everybody?
At Browning, I'm lucky to be part of a fantastic team which thinks about this a great deal and works on it tirelessly. And I think I guess I would want to say there are probably three things that we have come to really want to focus upon as we look at character or ethics or moral education, however we would want to describe that. And I think the first is this idea that, and it's embedded in our mission, is that good character is kind of rich and nuanced and what we might call thickly described. That is, like, we want boys to avoid false binaries. The idea that one is either courageous or compassionate. That a good man is either decisive or patient. That you can be either strong or sensitive, or active or reflective. That a healthy moral life involves understanding that we need a whole host of attributes to live well for ourselves and for others. And that we should be wary of seeing good qualities, any good qualities, as incompatible with one another or with being a good man. So sometimes, for example, compassion requires courage and vice versa. And we would want our boys to appreciate that. The second thing I think we think a lot about is that while ethics historically is often seen having to do with reasoning and moral reasoning, ethical reasoning, and rightly so, we want to make sure that our boys understand that ethics or living well or character has a real emotional dimension. So we try to play that out in our curriculum, where we have courses on how boys can develop and sustain empathy, or what we call radical empathy. Coursework on how to maintain and sustain not just relationships but friendships. That we've embraced the Ruler Social Emotional Learning Program out of Yale University Center for Emotional Intelligence, because we think that all people, but boys in particular, have got to be vested with a certain type of emotional literacy, which allows them to understand themselves and the world around them. And we, of course, work designed to promote boys' mindfulness and self-care. That we're really trying to emphasize for boys that we need to be emotionally whole to live well for ourselves and for others. And this emotional component extends to the entirety of our enterprise, right? In that, what we're trying to do is, as we build character, is to help boys develop emotional connections, not just to each other, but to mentors and to the ideas about living well or character that these mentors share and represent.
I think values develop when boys are encouraged to unearth interests and passions and get good at things, and a high expectation of standards, and across a very diverse setting that presents challenge to them as well as opportunity. So I think all those things start to develop and nurture boys to think about what it is they actually believe in as being important in their lives. And it's from that values come. So we would be, how we pursue that, well, that gives you some background. But then we would do what I know that many, many schools do. We look at breadth and diversity of opportunity. We look to encourage service beyond our immediate community. We look to encourage connection with more diverse communities so that we can learn from them, and how those aspects of what things that are pretty much common to our condition, but how different cultures embrace them and explore them and meet the challenges of them. We look to hopefully make boys confident and to have high expectations about doing their bit, and maybe that little bit more. And we like to talk about the melding of economic and social enterprise, rather than perhaps seeing them as different things, that they are, intimately and increasingly connected. And I like to sort of try and work on these things and have a narrative to them, so that the desire is that they become habit forming, and they become how boys think and act.
The last thing, and I think it's affiliated, that we think about with regard to helping boys become good men or men of character is that they need to develop a meaningful personal story or narrative upon which they can kind of hinge and hang their moral identity. To put it differently, to contribute meaningfully to our world, as our mission asks, one first has to have a sense of what one's own life means. That is, that boys need to work towards articulating their own story about themselves, their own narrative, to discover who they are, and more importantly, to consider what it means for the person they are to flourish, to become the best aspects of themselves, and to explore how that flourishing can benefit the broader world.
Boys' schools around the world are working hard to write a new narrative for boys and broaden the definition of masculinity, which has traditionally been limiting for the boys in their care. Tom and John shared their insights into this conversation.
It's a great question. I have to say, one of the most exciting aspects of being in boys' schooling today is the idea that this is that masculinity is something that we should be considering deeply, or perhaps in different ways than we previously have.
Like all in boys' schools, I ponder this a fair bit. I don't believe that we can talk about what makes a good boy or a good man before we consider what we mean by a good person. And of course, this comes back to values and also what comes from values, the behaviors. And I think once we do that, we can then ask ourselves how such values manifest for particular circumstances and particular times. And in the circumstances and times, how does it impact on being male?
I'd love to share a quick story, if I could. I teach a class to grade 10 boys, and it's a class on purpose and one of our values. But during the course of it, I asked the boys, what is it that you like about being a boy or a man? And the guys weren't really sure what to make of it. And one of them said, is this a trick? Which I thought was really interesting, because we don't want boys to apologize for their maleness or their masculinity. But we do, I think we do want them to recognize that they have agency, I guess, in helping to construct their gender expression. That we want our boys to realize that the whole of human life is fundamentally dialogical. That is to say that the world may see something in you, but you have the right and the responsibility and the opportunity to help define what the world sees. And so that boys, we want boys to see themselves as active participants, active subjects in defining their masculinity, and not just those who inherit a set of assumptions that I think we've seen are not always entirely healthy. Too many men don't get or don't take the opportunity to consider to consider the cultural expectations about masculinity that are placed upon them. And I want to be really clear that there is nothing wrong with the qualities that are often associated with traditional understandings of masculinity, things like strength or courage or self-reliance. But we do our boys a disservice, I think, if this is all we show them of manhood. And I think one of I don't want to say the only reason, or maybe not even the principal reason, but an important reason for boys' schools to exist, I think, is as affinity groups, which are just, this is a place where we gather boys under the guidance and care of adults who authentically want to know and love them, and we give them the chance to explore a fuller spectrum of masculinity, one which should and can include things like strength and courage and self-reliance, but also involves strengths or virtues like kindness and flexibility and collaboration and so forth, things which have not traditionally been assigned to our gender.
It starts with, I believe, an awareness of what a good person is, what we believe a good person is. And I certainly don't think there can be a generic view of a good boy. I just don't think that's possible. I think we're all different. And that those values of a good person come out in different ways with different people, but with common theme, hopefully.
And I think what's important about this too is that we can help liberate our boys when we help them to see that like them, accomplished, talented girls are subject to similar gender constraints, and that the ways in which we define manhood and masculinity have real implications for the entirety of humanhood. If we can help boys broaden the spectrum of quote unquote acceptable or healthy masculinity, they're going to do wonderful things for themselves, but they're also going to do wonderful things for the other people in their lives, as it allows all of us to tap into the fullness of who we are. Traditionally, so much of a really narrow and I think unhealthy masculinity has been defined against that which is purportedly feminine. And I think that limits boys and girls alike. I think boys' schools are phenomenal spaces to do that. That if we take our mission seriously, if we take our opportunities seriously, we can and should be leaders in this front.
I'm sure you will agree with me that we can all learn so much from seasoned professionals like Tom and John. I asked them both to share their tips for success in teaching boys.
I would say don't overcomplicate things that don't need overcomplicating. I would say that remember it's all relational, and that the contract of respect that we form with boys doesn't have implicit in it reciprocity, and you need to show them that you value them.
My best tip would probably be to observe those teachers about whom the boys really seem to care. But I think what they might see in that is that the teachers who are really great for boys recognize that boys, in the main, really actually want to know that you are interested in them as people, even if they're posturing otherwise. To be successful as a teacher in this way often requires patience and perseverance, and even a lot of forgiveness. But I think it's worth it, both in terms of the relationship you can cultivate with a boy, but also the sense of professional fulfillment that one feels. So just the idea that boys actually want to know that you're interested in them.
The last thing I would throw into the mix is always expect great things. And boys like it when you expect things of them. If they don't feel that, or if they're finding things a little mundane, they'll cruise, stare out the window. Not all. I mean, these are generalizations. But I think that the more we expect them to do great things, the more they'll step up, and they want to do that. They want to show you, if you've got that contract there with them of respect, they want to show you what they can do, what they can achieve, and they'll go with you on the journey.
A related thing, I think, is as a teacher, just being honest about who you are. Maybe all kids are great at sniffing out inauthenticity, But I think boys the boys I've been around are very good at it. They know when they're being pandered to. They know when you're not being true to yourself, and I think that that's a kind of insult to their dignity and to yours. And so the degree to which a teacher can kind of maintain her or his authenticity, I think that's kind of the coin of the boys' realm. So I think that's something that I've tried to. I came to people shared with me, and I thought it was good advice. And maybe lastly, very particularly, I think that the more I've been in this, the more I'm trying to recognize that boys, I think, don't necessarily respond well to didactic lectures about morality and ethics. I think they respond much better to stories that you would tell, particularly if you've cultivated a relationship with them. And we need to be judicious in the telling of stories. They have to be appropriate in terms of time and content. But when they're told, I think they can be really effective, particularly if you don't give away the moral, if you let boys work it out for themselves. I think if we're serious about pedagogical moves that can help boys discover more of who they can be in the world as ethical beings, I think giving them stories, but also trusting them to work out what's significant about those stories on their own. I think that's a helpful tactic, helpful pedagogical move for the classroom and in advisory and hallways and so forth.
I always end these conversations with heads by asking them to share something they've read, heard, or interacted with recently that has challenged them or shaped the way they think about teaching boys. It's a bit of a cheat question, actually, because it usually helps me bolster my own reading list, and my worldview grows as a result. Tom and John's insights on this episode are no different.
The other day, it's probably a little while ago, 2 or 3 weeks ago now, I was sitting chatting to a young female English teacher about the senior literature program at our school and the study of what they were doing. And they were sort of involving talk and discussion and reading around the feminine form and the male gaze. And I recalled a poem that I always quite liked by Carol Ann Duffy called Beautiful, which I suggested to her may be useful. And it caused me to reread it and again think about what its impact is to boys and boys' schools on how we make boys aware of the impact of their influence and their actions and the way that they do behave, even if it's in a slightly more removed manner. Their gesture has big impact, and they need to be made aware. They can't carry it as a burden, but they do need to know that the world they live in it extends beyond them and their group of friends. And I think that is a big challenge for us, that lighting up their minds to the consequences of their behaviors.
There's a pair of books about how boys cultivate friendships and relationships and develop identity that have been really important to me. One is by a scholar named Judy Chu, and it's called When Boys Become Boys. And it was something that I came upon. It's a study of boys and girls in a early childhood program in an urban American area, kind of a progressive school. But what Judy Chu found was how readily and quickly boys as young as 4 and 5 adopt standard and traditional tropes of masculinity, and how all the kind of social forces within the school, no matter how well-intentioned the teachers were, and no matter how open-minded the parents were, just how quickly 4 and 5-year-old boys can adopt certain attributes that allow them to establish social hierarchy, and how those attributes are kind of affirmed and supported by the kids, boys and girls around them. So for me, the lesson was just that we have got to be incredibly mindful, even in the earliest going, about the messages we're giving our boys and the types of conversations into which we're inviting, and the opportunities we're giving them to consider what it means to have status and significance in the world, because even very young boys are inheriting a view which might not be altogether healthy in the long run. Kind of affiliated with that is a book. It's an older book, but I came upon it later. It's about a decade old, I think, by a woman named Niobe Way, who's I think it's a professor at NYU. It's called Deep Secrets, and it's this wonderful study of how boys, particularly in adolescence, between 13 and 15, how friendships that they've had with each other, these kind of intense male friendships, which has often been marked by intimacy and vulnerability and deep trust, they start to fall away as these boys move into later adolescence and start adopting and inheriting all these ideas about what it means to be a man, to be self-reliant, to be stoic, to not betray any emotion, to quote unquote man up. And these qualities are incompatible with the type of friendships that they had previously had, and which had done such wonderful things for them in terms of nurturing them emotionally and giving them a place to be in the sense of who they were in the world. And so to me, it's again this kind of marker of just how attentive we need to be. Adolescence is hard for anyone under the best of circumstances. But if you're getting a message that the type of friendships you've had are no longer worthy of the manhood you're hoping to explore and express, that's a really confusing and difficult thing to share with boys becoming men.
At a sad occasion, but it was beautifully done, a memorial service for a young old boy who left 5 or 6 years ago, left the school. And in the order of service, the young lad had written for himself before he passed away. It was written one of his favourite quotes, which is from Steinbeck's East of Eden, regarding the resilience of the human soul. And it reminded me, and I think it's from the same part in East of Eden, if my memory serves me right. It reminds me of what was always one of my favourite little lines from that, where he notes that the free exploring mind of the individual human is the most valuable thing in the world. And revisiting that, again, refocus my mind on those important things in running a school, and particularly a boys' school. I imagine that we can get caught up in measures and routines and curriculum and examination and qualification. But our big game, our big thing is that free exploring mind of the individual human, in our case, the individual boy. And that's important to me to keep that in mind running a school.
I just finished a book by a journalist named Peggy Orenstein. It's helpfully and very explicitly titled "Boys and Sex," and it's about that. But I think what it's been interesting. It was interesting to me in the emphasis that Orenstein gives on how we all need to be pushing past ideas about the boys' education around sex and relationships needs to focus entirely or exclusively on issues of things like consent and respect. Now, I want to be really clear that the consent and respect for others has got to be the foundation of everything we do. But Orenstein points out that we so seldom talk to boys and girls, either singly or in dialogue, about what it means to have a healthy, loving, giving relationship. How do we talk to our partners and loved ones and intimate others about what it means to love, what it means to be fulfilled, and these sort of things, what it means to be generous, what it means to be honest. And that if we're cutting boys off from this dialogue and they're getting all then their information about what it means to be in successful relationships from media or worse still from pornography, then we were setting up not only their partners but them up for just miserable experiences. And so that to me was just I think it was illuminating, and I think it points the way towards better conversations about what the IBSC has been exploring on things like responsible sexual citizenship. That we can be not only responsible to one another, but we can be generous with one another. If we can adopt a shared view about what it means to live and love well together.
I trust you have listened keenly, as I did when recording this conversation with Tom and John. So many ideas they shared resonate deeply with me, and IBSC is fortunate to have educators of their caliber leading and teaching in our schools. Thank you to both of them for their time and insight. Just a reminder as we close to head to our website to check out our online classes starting in June and July, and to catch past episodes of this podcast on your favorite podcast app. These are also archived on our website. Until next time, from me, Bruce Collins, goodbye and keep safe.